St. Andrew is an important figure for people all around the world, but he holds a very special place in the heart of Scots. We've even got a whole national holiday for him. So where better to celebrate St. Andrew's Day than in St. Andrew's Cathedral, the biggest, most magnificent cathedral in Scotland from the Middle Ages. People have been celebrating St. Andrew since the time of Malcolm III, but back then they did it a bit differently. It was more tied in with the autumnal festivals in Scotland, where you would gather the harvested crops, sacrifice cows in preparation for the winter. It wasn't until 2006 that the Scottish Parliament actually legislated St. Andrew's Day as a national bank holiday. One of my favourite aspects about Scottish history is watching the ancient and the old turn into something more recognisable to us today. And we see evidence in that process here in St. Andrews, where we've got a huge collection of Pictish stones showing faith and religion changing. And St. Andrews has been a pilgrimage site since the 8th century, when St. Regulus brought the bones of St. Andrews to the town. Now, those bones included a couple teeth, an arm bone, finger bones, and a kneecap. Not what we might call a visitor attraction nowadays, but enough to draw the crowds back then. It was during the reign of King Malcolm III that there was a huge transformation in Scotland's spiritual scene, but it wasn't so much down to him as it was down to his wife, Margaret, an English princess born in Hungary. She really modernised the Scottish church, and that went a long way towards making St. Andrews its epicentre. It used to be that the spiritual heartland of Scotland was in the west, in Iona, but because of dangers from the Norse, they have to shift it east, fundamentally changing the face of the country. Construction began on what would become Scotland's grandest cathedral in 1160, but there were a few hitches along the way. For instance, a fire did quite a bit of damage, and in 1272 there was a hurricane which blew down much of the works. So it took over 100 years to get this thing built, but it was worthwhile. When Robert Bruce came to see it concentrated in 1318, he surely would have had that adage in his head: if at first you don't succeed, try, and try again. The saltire itself has taken on special significance for Scots. Now, if you're wondering why it's an X rather than a standard cross, it's because tradition says that St. Andrew was actually crucified on a sideways cross in that fashion. So to reflect that possibility, hence the X of the saltire. And it was a very important symbol from very early on and throughout the Middle Ages. For instance, it was flown in front of armies before major battles such as Bannockburn. And there was actually a law passed in the mid-1400s where every Scots soldier who went to the continent to fight had to have a saltire emblazoned upon them. St. Andrews is one of the hotbeds of the Protestant Reformation, a time of radical change throughout Scotland and indeed throughout Europe. And as a huge symbol of Catholicism, the cathedral couldn't be left untouched. It was stripped of its icons in 1559, and by 1561 it was completely abandoned. There's a sort of beautiful irony in it though, in that for the cathedral, old Pictish stones were actually used during its construction. When the cathedral was abandoned, a lot of its stones went into local buildings. So there's a wonderful circularity to the architecture of St. Andrew's Cathedral. Many countries have holidays celebrating their national identity, and St. Andrew's Day is Scotland's take on that. St. Andrew may not have been born a Scot, but he's come to mean something to everyone in this small but proud country.